Joining me now to discuss this and the other big stories today is the Australian's chief political correspondent, Geoff Chambers in Canberra. Geoff, thank you for your time. Look, I think the analysis that many political observers are making at the moment is the Prime Minister going to press ahead with this model of the voice to the referendum, even if it looks like it's going to fail? Or that question that Simon Benson posed in his piece today, is there a point at which the Prime Minister might think, if he isn't getting that momentum that he wants, that he might just have to change to Indigenous recognition only or risk it failing?
Hi, Sharri. Yeah, I think there's some serious discussions happening behind the scenes in terms of providing some further details of what this voice advisory body might look like, because to date, we hear a lot from the government about misinformation and disinformation, but there's quite a vacuum there because very little is known about the power, influence and reach of a voice advisory body. And those on the yes side themselves all have differing views about how powerful or influential such a body would be. So to fill that vacuum, people obviously are raising concerns about it. So one option for them to look at over the coming months is to provide some extra detail. But I'm very doubtful, and the government have actually said this before, that they want to provide too much detail. They've previously said that the referendum would happen. If a yes vote was successful, that the voters would then be told exactly how this thing would work. So I think that they will be hoping that the polling corrects, comes back. They're going to obviously run this thing like a election campaign. So yes. I'm assuming probably in a month's time we'll hear a date in October, probably October 14, for a referendum date. And then we have this real sort of 6 to 8 week blitz in terms of trying to, turn what is appearing to be a downwards trend around.
There's also the question, Geoff, on who actually would sit on the voice, the body that advises Parliament. And you wrote a fascinating piece today about an Indigenous voice advocate, so a Yes campaigner, Thomas Mayo, and you revealed that he's a militant unionist and outspoken figure on the government's First Nation referendum working group, but that he's previously called John Howard a bastard, and that he's also warned that politicians would face consequences if they ignore the voice advisory body. You know, it's things like this, revelations like this, your story today, learning who's on the working group, the outrageous things that they've said. You know, this is also what could turn people off supporting a yes vote.
Well, I think this is the challenge for the yes side, is that they have so many voices involved from very, very different backgrounds. And there is a real divergence of views and opinions. So in a way, that's harder to manage. Whereas the no side, it's a smaller group, and they have a very clear, end game in terms of what they're looking for. And we saw Noel Pearson and other senior yes people out last week talking about a potential shift in strategy to focus more on constitutional recognition rather than this voice advisory body, because it's becoming clear at the moment that a big turn-off in terms of what the focus groups and polls are saying is this confusion over what this voice body actually looks like.
Now, let's move on to the public broadcaster, yet another controversy, but this time the Labor Communications Minister, Michelle Roland, is actually demanding answers from management at the ABC over their decision to cut 120 jobs, including entirely scrapping the role of political editor. Just an absolutely absurd decision. And as has been reported, Andrew Probyn was among those axed. We reported that on Thursday night on the program just as the news was breaking. Geoff, Michelle Roland is demanding answers here, but people also want to know what role Laura Tingle had to play. Did she defend these jobs at the board level?
Oh, this is our ABC at work here, Sharri. On what planet does a media organisation with a heavy federal politics perspective think that a political editor position is redundant? So I think there are a lot of questions over who was involved, who signed off on this. And to date, over the last few days, they really haven't been able to explain themselves. And now they've caught themselves up in this obsession around diversity. Instead of looking at what the core business is, who are the key people, the experienced people that you need in those roles, and they make this crazy decision. So I think that I think that Michelle Roland, there's merit in her finding out exactly who's made the decisions and what the explanations are, because it's a bit iffy at the moment.
Yeah, look, and I'm going to discuss this later on with my panel, Joe Hildebrand and Andrew Carswell, but you'd wonder, Nick Hayter wrote about this today, you wonder if Andrew Probyn wasn't white, if he wasn't male, whether he would have been made redundant. We'll come back to that later in the show. Now, the Australian Defence Force looks like it's going to introduce body-worn cameras for its SAS soldiers, its elite soldiers, to try and counter false claims or expose misconduct. This is the plan. It's a move that was recommended by the Brereton War Crimes Inquiry. Geoff, how is this measure? It's an exclusive in the Australian newspaper. How is this measure being received today?
Well, the coalition was provided this recommendation by Brereton and they made a decision not to proceed with it. There's a couple of clear issues involved. One of those issues is a potential disconnect between your frontline troops and the commanders in terms of trust. And the other issue, which is a really serious issue, is in relation to enemy troops getting their hands on this vision and potentially using it for propaganda purposes. So we see these body cameras used in our local police forces, and there's merit there, but there is a lot of pushback from our special forces, our elite troops who are sent out on the front lines, and they should be listened to. The coalition obviously made that decision, and that's been raised today, and there's been a bit of debate around that in terms of whether or not this should happen.
All right, very quickly before you go, Geoff, you wrote a story in the paper today as well, and it's been a big issue in Parliament about the government's 60-day dispensing policy at pharmacies. This has led to warnings from the Pharmacy Guild that there could be 20,000 jobs lost and mass closures. And we saw even Anthony Albanese's local Sydney pharmacist spoke to you, an ALP member, Adele Tahan, and she spoke to you objecting it. And then the Prime Minister was asked about this in question time.
Yeah, that's right, Sharri. So I think the big problem for the government here is the lack of consultation and the lack of modelling. They're now trying to do modelling on the run to test what those impacts would be. From a consumer perspective, of course, you'd like to be able to get 2 months' worth of medicines, but it does raise a real concern in terms of some medicines around shortages and in terms of those dispensing fees, particularly for community pharmacists. And that's where the pushback's coming from. It's less your big pharmacists that have the retail arms, and it's more that local suburban pharmacist that's going to have there's going to be a financial impost on them. And if they do have to let go of staff or reduce opening hours, that means less services for Australians.
Yeah. All right, Geoff Chambers, thank you so much for your time as always on a Monday.